Heavenly Wind, a versatile mantra that eloquently showcases the agile aspect of Galebreathe in combat. Hi, I'm Spiders, a top 50 Galeman, and in this video I will be teaching you everything you need to know to master Heavenly Wind. Let's get into it. As usual, we'll start with the modifiers. The modifiers that work on Heavenly Wind are Stratus and Cloudstones, Rush and Drift Shards, and Eternal and Aeon Lockstones. However, from my testing, it doesn't appear that any of these modifiers have a noticeable impact. And even if they do, their impact is likely not noticeable enough to outweigh the cost of the extra added ether on Heavenly Wind. So for these reasons, I recommend just sticking to the base, no modifiers Heavenly Wind. Moving on to the deep gems, there isn't really any special synergy with Heavenly Wind in a specific deep gem, so I'd recommend just sticking with Bloodless. As always, deep gems are sort of preference based, but most people would probably agree that the optimal competitive choice is Bloodless gems, so if you don't know what to choose, definitely go with that option. Usually in these types of videos I'd include a talent section, however Heavenly Wind does not have any talents associated with it, so we'll skip this section for this video. Moving on, there's a couple unique mechanics to Heavenly Wind that you might not know about. First, normally when you feint Heavenly Wind it'll bring you into the air, however this does not happen when you either slide cast Heavenly Wind or use an aerial into Heavenly Wind. So in these situations the usage of Heavenly Wind is slightly different. From my knowledge, this has never been really super useful for me, but maybe there's some underrated usage of Heavenly Wind not bringing you in the air in these situations, I don't know. However, in the current meta, this doesn't really work well as a mix-up, and nobody has found a good way to utilize this, so this mechanic is probably not very helpful. However, a mechanic that is very helpful, and you should try to utilize to its utmost potential if you're using Heavenly Wind, is the Heavenly Wind move stack. By spamming M1s, crits, or even mantras during Heavenly Wind's windup, you can move stack them with the final hit of Heavenly Wind, and do Heavenly Wind's attack at the same time as your move stacked attack. This move stacking mechanic with Heavenly Wind is very strong since it lets you do significantly more damage with Heavenly Wind and even potentially combo extend. Heavenly Wind by itself doesn't do much damage, but with this mechanic it does much more, which is what you'll see people complaining about a lot. Also, one thing that's important to know about this move stacking mechanic is that it only works when Heavenly Wind is used at a range, so if you go straight down with Heavenly Wind you can't move stack. Also keep in mind that if you're watching this video a while after this video has been posted, this may have been patched, since especially with this video bringing publicity to this mechanic, pretty much everybody's gonna abuse this mechanic. So yeah, hopefully this doesn't follow the pattern of my other videos as well. I'm also kind of nerfing myself here, but yeah, make sure you abuse this while you can. Okay, so moving on to the effective use cases. The first one that I'd like to begin with is one that you'll get most of your usage from Heavenly Wind from, and that is feinting. There are lots of sub-use cases derived from feinting. First, I'd like to mention that it's pretty unique vertical mobility. Something that you can do with Heavenly Wind that you can't do on many mantras is feint it in order to get some vertical mobility. It can be useful for situations like climbing up stuff, etc., but I'm sure that's obvious, so I won't really talk much about it. Something else I'd like to mention about Heavenly Wind is that it's pretty strong for feinting compared to other mantras. For one, no matter when you feint it, will play the entire sound cue, which is good for any mantra when it comes to feinting, since it's pretty much impossible to tell just from the sound alone whether or not you will actually use the mantra or just feint it. And also, Heavenly Wind is special in particular, since when it brings you into the air, it brings you out of your opponent's camera view, so they can't see what you're doing. This means that they'll pretty much have to guess whether or not you feint, since you're out of their camera view and they can't see your animations very well. So because of this, Heavenly Wind is a very reliable feint, and pretty much everyone will always block against it, which is different from other mantras where if you feint too early, people will just not react at all. So for these reasons, and also because of the drawbacks which I'll get into later, you should really be feinting Heavenly Wind much more than you actually cast the mantra, so keep that in mind. Another common use case of Heavenly Wind is roll caching. Since you can aim Heavenly Wind pretty much anywhere you want on the ground, and you can always choose wherever you'll aim right before the mantra actually hits, Heavenly Wind is pretty good for roll caching, and if used properly can be pretty much unavoidable for your opponent, as long as you have good aim. Also, even if your opponent manages to put up their block in time after you catch their roll, if you remember to combine the move stacking mechanic with Heavenly Wind here, you can do lots of posture damage and punish them for their block, which makes up in part for Heavenly Wind's slow speed when it comes to roll caching. Another use case of Heavenly Wind that I like to mention is using it as sort of a counter. Heavenly Wind can be used to punish some longer duration moves like shoulder bash, Gale lunge, etc. since Heavenly Wind puts you safely in the air before doing a teleport attack. This is a pretty reliable option, so make sure you remember this is available. The last use case I'd like to mention is wave dashing. You've probably seen speedrunners do this in their videos. Wave dashing is pretty much where you use Heavenly Wind, and then right at the peak of the Heavenly Wind windup, you press Control and R and use Cap Artist. By doing this allows Heavenly Wind to fling you while you're ragdolled, and gain some pretty considerable distance, especially if you're high up in the air. While wave dashing does take some practice to master, once you can do wave dashes consistently every time, it's actually pretty good mobility. So a pretty nice use case to know of for sure. Moving on to the drawbacks, the first one I'd like to mention is very noticeable, and that is the windup. Heavenly Wind has one of the longest windups out of any Gale mantra, which means that if you're against a good player, you'll always have plenty of time to prepare some response to Heavenly Wind, which makes it harder to take advantage of the actual Heavenly Wind attack itself. Besides that, another issue is that Heavenly Wind can be very punishable. If you use Heavenly Wind a lot, something you might have noticed is that after landing Heavenly Wind, it can be very hard to see what you're doing, and it can also be hard to see what your opponent is doing due to the jarring teleport effect of Heavenly Wind and also some particles created. Because of this, if your opponent knows what they're doing, they can punish you for the fact that you can't really see anything very well. So this is something to be wary of, especially if your Heavenly Wind gets parried and your opponent gets attack priority. Another drawback to the mantra is that it actually does take a lot of skill to use properly. Since the main use of Heavenly Wind comes from feinting, you have to learn how to properly take advantage of the feint and use it to create a threatening offense to your opponent, which takes time and practice to learn. The last drawback that I'd like to mention is that at times, this mantra can be really buggy. As you can see here, sometimes this bug happens where you can't move and your character starts getting kind of janky, it's kind of weird. But I'm sure that if you've used Heavenly Wind a lot, especially in Chime, you'll have noticed this bug at some point, and probably had to suffer the consequences of it. So, in order to protect yourself from this bug, you should know that in order to fix it and make your character work properly, you need to re-equip your weapon. Luckily, this bug only seems to happen in Chime and not the overworld, but still a pretty annoying bug, so definitely worth including in the drawbacks. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any more questions relating to Heavenly Wind or whatever else. Like and subscribe for more Top Gale content, and see you in the next one.